Our next panel discussion, towards energy security and shared benefits, will be a moderated panel by Justin Hayes. Justin Hayes is the executive director of the Idaho Conservation League. Justin is a native Idahoan, and before working with ICL, he worked as an environmental advocate in Idaho and Washington, D.C. for organizations such as Idaho Rivers United, Save Our Wild Salmon, and American Rivers. Justin has a really unique blend of science-based technical skills, public policy, and lobbying experience. He has degrees in human biology and earth systems and a master's degree from Stanford University School of Earth Sciences. Justin rejoices in knowing that his work is protecting the things that make Idaho great: our spectacular landscapes, our wildlife, our clean air, and our clean water. We're so grateful for Justin moderating this panel for us today. Go ahead and take it away, Justin.
Thank you, everyone. It's nice to be here, and it's an honor to be able to moderate this panel of experts and people who are working in the field on issues that are incredibly relevant for Idaho and for all of our society. I'm going to start with a little bit of context, and then I'll introduce the speakers, and we'll be away with the show. I think we heard a lot of things this morning, and one thing that really is a through line is that change is coming. The way we've done things, our sense of how things worked are changing. Our economies are changing in Idaho, our urban economies, our rural economies, and how we work, where we work, that is also changing. And at the core of that, that means our communities are changing. And that creates the opportunity for strengthening our communities and our relationships with each other. And it also creates the opportunity for fractures to appear. On top of this is the ever-present backdrop of climate change. We heard that the patterns of precipitation and the way that we generate electricity through hydro is not necessarily as reliable as we once thought it was. Our landscapes, the natural world, is affected by this climate change. Our people are affected by it. And of course, we also heard that energy demands are changing as well. We are demanding more energy for our modern world. How we generate this energy is, of course, also changing, and in many ways for the better on that backdrop of climate change. But the constant of change is real. And even as we think we understand where we're going, we see that that too is changing. So change is coming, and more change is coming. And this change, of course, creates the opportunity for uncertainty. And that uncertainty is very uncomfortable for many of us and very stressful. And that, of course, affects the way that we interact with each other. There's a lot of excitement in some corners around the change that's coming and the energy transition that we are in the midst of. I'm excited about the opportunity to address climate change as we change the way that we make electricity. Other people might be very excited about the opportunity for jobs, for themselves, for their children and their communities. And then there are also opportunities around a growing economy and what that might mean for the prosperity of people. But there are also concerns that are every bit as real. There are political and social concerns about how this change will affect our communities. There are economic concerns as one way of doing business is replaced by another, perhaps. And then, of course, there are environmental concerns. And my organization, the Idaho Conservation League, is right in the nexus of all of this. We have We celebrated our 50th anniversary last year. And for much of those 50 years, our members and the people of Idaho have seen our work to protect special places, the places that we all value and love, those places where we recreate and that provide clean air and clean water and wildlife habitat. And the change in how we generate electricity means that some of those places are also going to be changed. And we also have a huge program to tackle climate change. We need Idaho to be carbon neutral. And so we need to see some of these facilities built. And we need to see that happen sooner rather than later. And how will that affect that public land space, sometimes that private land space, that change, that uncertainty? And underlying all of that, of course, is the sense of urgency to get there soon so that the changes we make are come in time. As we go forward, will there be winners and losers? Is there a way for us to go forward together where there are winners and winners? One of the things that we think about is how can we get to yes on some of these proposals, some of these projects that people are envisioning will be built in Idaho on our lands. How can we ensure that these projects don't cause undue harm? And how can we ensure that these projects do provide benefits for the communities that are affected by them? That's what we're going to be talking about today. I'd like to introduce the panel for you here. I'm going to start just by introducing everyone, and then we're going to come back and do a little bit of an icebreaker question before we get into the real meat of the matter. So first up here is Alana Edmo. She is the Energy Resource Coordinator for the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. Next is Rebecca Wood. Rebecca is a county commissioner for Lincoln County. And then we have Wyatt Peterson. Wyatt is the director of the Department of Energy for the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. There are full bios in your materials. I hope you will read them. And I hope that during the lunch, you will come and say hi to these great panelists and others and ask them deep, deep questions about the work that they're doing. To each of you, I'd like to ask, can you tell us a little bit more about the communities that you work in and represent? Who are you doing this work for, and why are you doing it?
I'll go ahead and start us off. Can you guys hear me okay? Wonderful. So the communities that I work for is a lot of it in the southeast Idaho region in the Pocatello area. In Fort Hall, Idaho is where the Shoshone-Bannock Indian Reservation is located. We have about a little under 550,000 acres that is of our tribal lands. It's a big chunk in the southeast Idaho region. We have large transmission lines that run through our reservation, and we also have major interstates and highways that run through our reservation. My job is to focus on the community within that, in those boundaries of the reservations, and also our ceded territories, which is our natural lands, lands that we have, were at before. Some of those to you guys might be like are considered federal lands. They are considered public lands, national parks. A lot of that is our natural ceded territory. So we do this for the entirety of the community, and including diversity, because our minorities are in a reversed spectrum. I'm sure you guys can imagine that. And so that's who we do this for, is for the community on our reservation.
Commissioner Wood.
I'm Rebecca Wood. I am Lincoln County Commissioner. I'm chairman of the board. I've been a commissioner for 8 years, chairman of the board for about the past 4 years. Lincoln County is a small population. We have about 5,300 people. It's very ag-based. Our biggest producers there are dairies and ranches. We have very little commercial business other than that. Probably 70% of our other workers, besides the dairies and ranches, drive out of the county to work. So we're kind of bedroom communities. We are highly recreation based. We are 76% federal in Lincoln County, so a lot of our lands are public lands. So I represent a very ag-based community that have been working the public lands for generations at a time. I also represent a community that's really in panic right now, that's faced with some major changes coming on that they're very scared of. Um, to be quite honest with, not only do we have one project with BLM that we're waiting for the final EIS to come out, and then we'll be going to the federal government for decision, but we have approximately 13 projects behind them. So that's who I represent.
Thank you. Director Peterson.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I think for myself, a lot of the same situation in Idaho, other than maybe, this area here. We're all pretty sparsely populated areas and things, but I think when I think about who we're doing this work for, it's obviously the people that live here today, but I also do try to keep in mind the ones that are going to come after us. That, as a tribal group of people, we very much believe that we are borrowing this from our children. Not that we had inherited it from our parents, but this land, the resources that are involved, and the decisions that we make today are largely centered on where we're going tomorrow, and so we try to keep that in mind. And that does include our own tribal community, but also all of the surrounding communities, our sister tribes throughout the region, the counties and states. So we try to keep a pretty good focus on everybody that we can.
Thank you. I'm now going to just turn the floor over to each of the panelists. We'd love to hear your thoughts about the emerging energy transition, and since our panel is really focusing on moving towards energy security and shared benefits, talk to us about that. Talk to us about whether you see this transition as positive for your community, negative for your community, a mixed bag. How are you engaging in this, and how will your community be affected by it?
When we talk about energy transitions towards security and shared beliefs, when I think about it, I think about creating like a resilient energy grid. I think it's positive for my community. I think it's positive for our surrounding areas in our environment. The reason why is because as the tribes, what you have heard earlier is sometimes hydropower is a dated technology, and it can only do so much. So like now a lot of us are all scrambling to find other renewable technologies to help offset that and improve the demand for the growing energy infrastructure. A lot of people have issues seeing the foresight in that. And so one thing within our community is we have to get out there. I had the opportunity, I think it was last week or the week before, meeting with Shalonda Baker out at INL. And she said something that was very impactful. She says that your initiatives are not achievable unless you have your community. And that doesn't just mean the people who live there, but that also means the people that have to deal with the infrastructure and the people that you live around with. So because we have, our reservation sits on 4 different counties, we also have to deal with Bannock County, or Power County, and Bingham County. We also have to deal with utility companies that are also run through there. There are several already have infrastructure already on the reservation. So we have a lot to include when we talk about community and how we can benefit the community in its entirety. The tribe's goals, of course, is to have a resilient energy grid. The ultimate goal, of course, is to have our own electric grid ourselves to help be an offsetter of hydropower, just because it hasn't been environmentally sound for our people traditionally. And I understand that's not for everybody, but that's just for us. And so the transition will impact us politically, it'll impact us economically, and it will also impact the people that live within our community who are really actively part of our community. And then thank you.
Just a little bit about myself. I'm certainly an alternative energy thinker. I think there's some very great opportunities. Having a background as a lifetime livestock producer, I remember my dad putting solar panels on wells and different issues to make us live off the grid comfortably a long, long time ago. He was a mathematician and a calculus teacher, and he always said that maybe one of these days people are going to get over it, and nuclear is going to be the way of the future. We're going to figure that out, and I always believed that. And it's coming to that fruition, I think, with the small nuclear plants. So I was raised very much to think forward thinking in energy. However, I find myself a very reluctant player in today's energy transitions as a county commissioner. So what we're faced with is suddenly, out of the blue, in our 76% federal lands, there's a very large chunk that ranchers and grazers have used for many generations. We also have a unique situation in that we are very much lava rock based in Lincoln County and the surrounding areas. We sit on one of the largest aquifers in the country, and we have some real fears and concerns about what happens to that aquifer when you start drilling in lava rock. We've had some past experiences that our citizens have been fearful of. We had flooding one year that went through some fissures in the lava rock because there's a lot of fissures, there's a lot of tunnels in the lava rock. There's really unknown issues under that ground. Ended up contaminating very large lakes of water, and people's wells ran green. And when I say green, I mean green, very green for quite some time. And that happened right in Lincoln County. And so when people think about disturbing those lava rock and fissures and tunnels, they're quite fearful of what could happen to our aquifer. And I think that fear is not unbased. We don't really know what will happen when we start drilling out there in those areas. And so that, I think, is one of our biggest concerns for our people. You also have to imagine that, so the first project up is Lava Ridge. I'm sure everybody's heard of it. 400 windmills, 750 feet tall. Just to give you some background on that, if you've gone over the Perrine Bridge to Twin Falls, if you put a windmill in the bottom in the Snake River, as you stand on the bridge, you would look in the eyeball of the turbine, and there'd still be 150 foot of blades up above you. So that is a very large windmill in an area that prides itself on its recreation and its grazing. And so there's a lot of fear to what those are going to look like, how it's going to affect our airspace and our fires and our grazing and our water and our everything really. And so a lot of the problems coming with this first project is that there's a lack of education in for the average citizen. We hear a lot of bad news about windmills, and it's very hard to sort through the good articles from the bad articles, the people that know what they're talking about and the people that don't. And so every day you see articles about how they don't work, and that the only way that it's positive is while the federal government is paying subsidies on them. We've had no education really come in on, for the average citizen, on why it would work long term without extensive federal subsidies. That is a big fear for everyone on what happens if it doesn't work. But more to the point is where Lincoln County lies. So we, you saw in the, do we have the slides up? Those are Shoshones. There's a little map of Lincoln County. I just wanted to show everybody. No?
You missed it.
Sorry, can't go backwards.
Okay. Well, anyway, you saw in the Idaho Power that there was a midpoint substation where the transmission lines come together. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, Lincoln County sits right there, and we sit in the middle of the Gateway and the SWIP lines. You see the little red circle? That is the approximately where Midpoint substation is in Lincoln County. So out there on that side of the map, there's two big areas where the proposed project is going in. But more than that, there's 13 or so projects in line waiting to see how this one goes, which is a scary thought. Some of those projects were, I don't understand how they can be multi-use. As much as I love solar and grew up using it, and I think everybody should take advantage of solar, is that a project that should be on federal lands? Is it multi-purpose? I don't think that it is. And the current way that they do solar farms, they fence it off. If you can't graze your cow under it and you can't ride your horse through it, it is not multi-purpose. It is not something that the public can use. These are public lands and they're meant for multi-use. The windmills are not fenced off, and so there is one positive there. However, again, they have their fearful ideas for Lincoln County. But the solar, to everybody that I've spoken to, really should be on private lands, because unless they're willing to put in the money to put them higher up in the air and to fence underneath them, kind of a reverse fence situation, then there's no way that they're going to allow people to ride their four-wheelers or run their cows under them. So we don't really understand how that could be multi-purpose at all. So with 13 projects in the wings, you can see how a very ag community could be in a panic. We're talking about a dramatic change of lifestyle. Being a realist, I think that we have started these programs without enough education for the public. The BLM, I don't think, has put in enough speaking about mitigation. And I don't mean mitigation of use of the land for, deer migration areas or, airplane corridors or anything. I'm talking about mitigation for little tiny highway districts that don't know how they're going to keep the roads up for massive projects, mitigation for all the people involved. I will have to say that Lava Ridge has tried hard to work with the communities and the districts, but because of the fear and because of the lack of education in our area and the huge change in looking at all these projects, many people are unwilling to speak to them. So that is a large part of the problems. I'm a realistic person, and I guess I'm also an Idahoan, and we love to fight to the death for what we believe in. And I believe in fighting to the death for these kind of things. However, you will hear me quote to people that fight to the death, but also get contracts signed so that in case it goes through, you're taken care of. And so I think that that's a big part that hasn't been looked at enough. So I guess I'll leave it there, that we're kind of in a crisis mode in Lincoln County. The other thing that I think is that because we sit where that midpoint circle was and on the transmission lines, we're fearful of having all of our very important recreation ground, grazing grounds covered with alternative energy projects. It's not something that people want. It's not something that any of the citizens I represent are for. If we had to have one, I think everybody else ought to have one, and so that it's spread out and that you don't put all of these projects in one area and cover all of that ground. Economically, there is some benefits to having projects. Obviously, you get some dollars into the county, which helps people's property taxes, puts in some different projects that we're in desperate need of, especially a little county like Lincoln County. However, you have to weigh whether the dollars coming into a county are worth the loss of the beautiful recreation grounds and some of the problems that might arise with your ranchers and grazers, wildlife issues. There's a lot to look at and be weighed. Money isn't everything, and in my community, they don't want the money. They don't want the projects. So that might not be realistic, but that's who I represent.
Yeah. So, one thing that has been brought up a lot and, and was just mentioned multiple times is the idea of public lands. And, what we call public lands today, these federal set asides, for Forest Service, BLM, BOR, whatever type of federal designation land might hold, all of those lands at one time were utilized by native people of the area. It just is what it is. And so, again, for us, when we're looking at a project in Lincoln County, it may not be completely apparent to people that we as the Shoshone-Bannock tribes, we want to have input on that, because that will have a direct impact on our treaty rights to be able to use those natural resources. And I don't know how familiar the group is with our treaty or any treaty in particular, but the United States views them, at least in language, as the supreme law of the land. They were enacted prior to statehood, and they have survived statehood, and they've been tested multiple times, and so one of our big driving things as we move forward is we're going to continue to fight for those. Like she was saying, that we want to fight for those treaty rights. We don't have the option to not. It's kind of overwhelming to try to keep up on the idea of everything that the tribes in particular would need to be involved with, as far as offering opinions or being in the discussion. I mean, the Shoshone-Bannock group in particular went all the way into Montana, Canada, Washington, Oregon, California, Utah, Nevada, Wyoming, Colorado, all the way down to Mexico. So they had this huge expanse of land that they used. And so when we talk about public lands today, I think it's important to keep in mind that we view those as those historical use areas, those treaty protected areas, and that's why we want to be involved. And I do think it's great to see a big group like this come together, and involving all the different people that are here. I think for us, we maybe would disagree with these large scale projects as well. Not to say that we want to oppose clean energy developments. What we would like to do, though, is we would like to be a part of the solution moving forward and having those discussions. And I think that was a very good point, that the tribes as well, we weren't necessarily given, the opportunity to learn about why Lava Ridge is a benefit or a risk, or how it would help, that community or ours or any of the others. We understand that there's a need to continue to develop these kinds of things. And I used to tell people in Fish and Wildlife all the time, we only get two choices. Either we enact policy change today, or we wait and nature will change the policy for us. So, we want to be a part of that going forward. And, I'm very glad to be here, and I'm interested to see where this goes overall. And that's why we have people like Alana working in our energy resources program that, like she had said, we want to see our community build its own resilience and have a shot at this clean energy future that we're moving towards, but we want to do it the way that we want to do that.
Yeah. So just to add on to Wyatt, what he had just said, is we want to be a part of it, and we want to add into it, right? We want to be a part of the big picture. Back when the dam was built in the 40s, the Bonneville Power Association dam, we didn't have a say or input or any type of inclusion. And that is a major power distributor for us, all of us right here, right now. And so by us asserting ourselves in this, that's how energy transition is an amazing opportunity, because now it's including people who didn't have that opportunity before. Some of the things that we are doing to get into it is we are taking a lot of effort into planning. We're taking small steps as far as updating our strategic energy plan. Right now we're working on, we try to make our place and ask for positions in public spaces. For example, we have a representative who sits on the Idaho State Energy Alliance. We've asked to have a seat on the Idaho Public Utility Commission to try to have a voice because we cover such a big area. But, because we're also a treaty reservation, we have a right to make our own laws and ordinances. So we're going to take it upon ourselves to update our own, create our own utility code, so we can regulate and be a part of it and to create that voice for ourselves. We're hoping to do small things to help be a contributor by creating mini microgrids for our community, our small communities. Our districts are broke up in 5 different districts. We are trying to help create more resilient power for them. Like the guy had mentioned, in Idaho Power, that weather was our biggest enemy. Yes, it is. Even with our community, our Idaho Power, I feel bad for them. In the first weekend in March, we had like that soggy, wet rain. I'm not sure if you guys experienced that here in Boise. It took, I think, approximately 36,000 people without power in our little area, and part of our community was affected by that. And another thing we're looking to do is look at other sources to create energy spaces. This site here is right next to the old FMC plant, which is a Superfund site. What we are looking to do is generate power and to try to help bring it back to our community and our surrounding communities, to create offset of hydropower for us. We're also taking a look at ag land. Lands that have been disturbed, have been disrupted, have been damaged in other ways. We want to give them an opportunity to help replenish themselves by looking at areas like that to set up temporary renewable technology structures or technology that can be moved to different areas. Kind of like how farmers rotate their cows. We want to be able to look at nothing super permanent, so we have a low carbon footprint, but also help be a big factor in energy here within the Idaho region, because this is where we're originally from. My grandpa on my paternal side, he's Chief Eagle Eye, and so that was here in the Boise Valley. You guys have Eagle Eye Park. That's my ancestor directly. So, we're all affected in some way. And it's not just one little area, it's a lot of areas where we are all affected and impacted. And so that's how we are going about it.
Thank you all. I'd like to remind the audience we're going to be taking questions. So there's cards on your tables. Please fill them out. And I'm not certain who is helping round those up, but if you raise your hand, I'm sure someone will come by and pick them up. Looks like over here is our helper. And then I'll be able to ask those questions too. A couple of quick questions though that I wanted to just sort of think about here. And a new BLM rule has really helped understand and explain the way in which federal agencies are going to be working, coordinating, consulting with tribes. There is a long-standing process around public engagement, and that's one of the ways that somewhat inadequately counties and other communities have brought into these discussions. I wonder if I could ask you, Commissioner Wood, and then I'll ask others too. How would we be able to get together so that we are not consulting about how to minimize the harm of these projects, but that we are working together to envision the benefits of these projects to the communities that will actually be impacted by them? So moving away from minimizing harm and moving towards maximizing benefits for the people that you represent. Commissioner Wood.
Well, I think education is obviously the biggest one. I mean, there is so much information out there that's scary to the typical citizen. I mean, I plugged into the internet the other day, and one of the things that popped up on my internet was how if you, had colts born around windmill projects, pretty quick their legs were turning under. And this was written by a veterinarian. Their legs were turning under, and all these horrible things were happening. And as a person who has produced livestock her whole life, that is a reason for panic, And so when you see those kind of things every day, but no one on the other side is giving you any information on how they actually work, how they are clean energy, how they can work without large subsidies after the initial build, how long they will last, any of those things to alter some of the other information, you're really seeing a one-sided picture as a citizen. So education, pre-education to some of these projects nationwide is really, people don't understand alternative energy or clean energy or how much we need it. And so a huge nationwide education, I know that's hard to say, but we really need it for the average citizen. The other thing is, I think that if you're talking about federal lands, you've got to entertain more mitigation. And like I said, mitigation means dollars for taxing districts, dollars for those affected, how they don't have to be scared because their roads are going to be put back to where they were. The water aquifer situation, they need more science. They need to know what's going to happen what happens if you do hit a fissure or a tunnel and the aquifer has changed somehow, it's diverted. And that's happened in our county where a large well or something went in, but because of the tunnels, I won't mention the commercial producer, but there is one commercial producer who put in some very large wells in our county. And then what happened is the neighboring wells all went dry. Well, in our county, we're at 600 feet in some areas to water. If you have to drill a new well, it's a $40,000 prospect, and most people cannot afford a $40,000 new well. And so when you have somebody messing with your water, which is life-giving in the desert, I mean, it's all of our lives, it's a very scary proposition. And so the need to know is what's going to happen if that happens. If you divert the water, I'm not saying the water's not going to be there, but if it might not be here anymore, it might be over here. And what happens to your ranch or your farm or even your house wells? Those kind of mitigation factors need to be more in the BLM consideration so that people can see how this is going to affect them and how it's going to be cured.
Dr. Peterson, maybe you could speak some about ways in which
You believe that the tribe could be engaged in a way that would make the benefits of this transition something realer to the tribe and less around just avoiding the harms to your treaty rights that could come if it was done poorly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, lowering people's electricity bills is a very helpful thing collectively for any of us, and we're included in that. But I also agree that educating people on why these things are important. Jobs are very important. Long-term, short-term during construction phases, all of those things. I think that no matter how it goes forward, we will all see benefits for it. I think it's a little bit hard to frame all of these things around how much electricity costs by dollars and cents only, because there are so many other facets to it that have to be considered. And you're right, though, the idea of only looking at ways to mitigate things that we see as harms isn't a good approach to this. We do need to start talking about collectively for the communities what would it look like, and what does it take in order for a community to see those benefits. So I don't exactly have the answer, but I think educating people and explaining that there are benefits and what they are would be very helpful.
Ms. Edmo, this question's for you. You mentioned that past development of dams has not always gone very well for all kinds of interests, but you mentioned tribal interests specifically. I wonder if you have ideas about how can we ensure that renewable development on public lands, perhaps on the reservation or on private lands, aren't seen 20 years from now as, well, now this is having negative impacts on our way of life. So how do we plan well enough this time so that the tribe's interests are taken into account and we don't regret these decisions later?
I think the first start would to sit down and have a conversation. But I'm sure the people who helped develop this infrastructure before did not have the foresight to see it out. I know we have scientists and who tried to help mitigate and create ladders. And, there was people who's out there doing what they could back then, what they thought was helping. to create salmon ladders and stuff. Well, and over time, we're seeing that it hasn't. So I think having conversations, partnering with amazing facilities like INL who have scientists to study these things, would be a good start. And but the first thing is probably sitting down and having the conversation and not just meeting and checking that box and saying we met with the tribes.
This question is for Commissioner Wood. Commissioner, you noted that Lincoln County is highly dependent on agriculture for its economy. And the questioner asks if agriculture is going to look the same in 20 years with climate change and changes in precipitation and temperatures. Do you need to be thinking of ways to diversify your economy because of the change is coming that is coming? Climate change is going to affect the way we do our lives and the way we grow our crops in the state. And is diversifying your economy around the development of renewable energy a way of ensuring that your county has an economic future for its people moving forward?
It could be. If it was done right, it certainly could be. Our local economy is a tough one. We don't sit in a very good spot for big commercial industrial businesses. We are very ag-based, mostly ranches, dairies, feedlots. We do have, Glambia, which again is ag-based. It's milk production and protein powders. From our local, they're probably one of our bigger employers. We have a state agency that's looking to move to a bigger area because they think we're too small as well. That would be ITD, is one of our bigger employers. It's really a difficult place to bring in industry and commercial. However, we are thinking that we need to change some of the ways that we do ag. So there's greenhouses, there's mushrooms, there's all kinds of organic, smaller crops that we're encouraging. We're writing grants for. We're trying to get people to do a lot more of those businesses to diversify some of our ag programs, which is big for us. We certainly are looking at the economy all the time. And I do think that an energy project, if done correctly, could help. It brings in a lot of dollars. One of the things that people need to know probably is someone needs to sit down and say, okay, if you have $1 million brought in or $4 million brought in a year, and it's used to offset property taxes, how will that affect each person in Lincoln County? That would be something very good for somebody to know if there was a reduction in those kind of taxes. It needs to be a community conversation so that the alternative energy is sited in the right area, it's the right size. I will have to say that in the beginning of this, I actually went to our state representatives and I said, maybe we should get a little handle on this, and maybe we should be more of the ones that control this. Like, if we choose where a siting project should be and the size of the project and the height of the project, and then we say, we've taken our turn, we've got a siting project that we're going to accept, and we're going to work heavily with the community and make sure it's in the right spot, then somebody else has to take some of these other projects. So, however, I was pretty much shown the door immediately. And booted out on the street, and that was from our state representatives, because they said your citizens don't want it, and they don't want it. That's very true. I, just being more realistic, was hoping that maybe we could get a handle on it in the beginning and say, we'll take one if you take one, and take one and take one, so that we don't have to have all 13 or 15 wrecking our recreation and grazing lands and that kind of thing in our county. However, it was not a popular call and nobody liked it. So, but those kind of things may work.
Director Peterson, there's a question here, whether you think that the tribe will take the initiative on developing large-scale renewables, either as a partner with others or perhaps as the driver of an initiative on reservation lands.
Get your contracts out. We would like to, ultimately that is something that we're trying to move towards, is again, this idea of planning these things out, figuring out where they make sense, and then, having the right partners in place, and then looking at, just being realistic for a tribe. I mean, we have a large land base, but we're not a wealthy tribe by any stretch of the imagination. And so, one of the things we want to look at are long-term agreements where we can eventually retain ownership of a project. It is absolutely something that, we'd like to do. We just want to do it in the right way with the right group of people involved and at the right time. So.
Ms. Edmo, I wonder if you could speak just for a second about some activities that you're doing on the reservation and in Fort Hall. I saw a flyer about a day that's going to be happening soon, the Energy Empowerment Day. What's the message that you're delivering to members in your community, and how is it being received, and how's that going?
Absolutely. If you're in Pocatello, stop by. It's April 30th from 4 to 6 p.m. Anyway, yes, what we're doing is we're hosting a lot of education activities within our community. This one about the Energy Empowerment Day is directed more to our community residents so they can take that power back, so they can know how to deal with things in unforeseen situations. You don't know really what to do in an emergency until an emergency happens. We have a lot of people who are on dialysis and oxygen. A lot of these things require power. We had some members say, well, I have a generator, but I don't know how to use it when it came to the outage. And I'd be like, oh my goodness. And so we're taking little opportunities by hosting little empowerment days, energy days. We're partnering with different people. We're partnering with actually BSU on this one. Thanks, BSU. And we have a lot of people coming out to that to try to help educate our community. And we're doing other stuff like that. We host raffles to people. We're also going to host later this summer a solar energy workshop with Northwest Indian College, where they'll be bringing home solar kits for people, and then they assemble them themselves and they're able to take those home. So that's how we're utilizing education within our community to help them better understand renewable technologies and buy-ins. And we're also submitting out surveys to the community too, to help understand what do they want, what do they think, what do they understand, what don't they know, so that's some of the things we're doing.
And Commissioner Wood, here's a question for you. You've mentioned your county has an awful lot of public lands in it, and you've mentioned the management doctrine around multiple use. These public lands are available for a variety of uses. Although it is the case, though, that while public lands may be available for multiple uses, very rarely are they seen as appropriate for all uses at all times in all places. So there's a bit of a segregation of uses. A mine site is probably not a great place for recreation. Grazing rights that take place on public lands often have limitations around the way that public can interact with those. You have to go through the gate, stay on the road, that kind of stuff. And so this questioner asks if it's really very realistic to imagine that all of the solar fields that could be developed also need to have all of that space available for people to continue to ride ATVs. And they ask, wouldn't that be off-road riding anyway? And aren't they supposed to be on trails and roads? So how do we find this balance so that some activities are where they are appropriately intended and acceptable, and not everywhere all at once, all the time?
That's a good question. I think you answered it yourself with balance. One project that's fenced off is singular. I understand that not all activities at all times can be on the project, but one project only in one area seems like that is not multi-use. If you look at mines, and I'm very familiar with mines, before moving to Idaho as a young person, I did grow up in Nevada. We still hunted the lands around the mines. There was areas that we couldn't go on, but each year they reclaimed parts of those mines back to the public. And so as the mines went on, then they moved to areas and we were able to hunt and go on. And so there was still activities going on all of those mines. They weren't fenced off. Obviously, there was certain areas like the pits where you weren't allowed to go, but eventually they reclaimed those back to the public again. I just think if there's one thing going on in one area that's not multi-use, I'm not saying that you have to be able to ride your four-wheeler. And no, in Lincoln County, there's a lot of open space where you can take your four-wheeler and your horse and your motorcycle anywhere you want to go. There is a few areas in Lincoln County that are got some special instructions where you're supposed to stay on the road or the trail, but for the most part, you can go anywhere you want to go. And people are used to that for hundreds of years, right? And the grazers have worked really hard to develop water lines and roads into areas, and you're allowed on all that property. You might have to go through a gate, but you're allowed to go through there. It's public use. So I guess balance is the thing. Is one thing a balance? I don't think so. Can you allow 2 or 3 things? That's more of a balance. And I guess that's where I have a problem with solar, unless they're willing to put it up high, put the fence under it, do something different. I see wind as being a problem during construction, obviously, because, you have to move around. They're going to have to fence off for safety reasons. After construction, it is more multi-use. People still graze under it. People still ride their horse or four-wheeler under it. And I don't know enough about battery storage to even speak to that, but I'm thinking they'd have to be fenced off as well. So I guess balance is the answer to that.
This is a question directed at someone from the Shoshone-Bannock. How does the tribe come together and make these decisions for the community? It's a sovereign nation. There is an elected council. How do these things move through to decision making in the community?
Yeah, so we do have an elected group. Our Fort Hall Business Council is what they're called, and so it's an elected group of 7 people, and they are the ultimate decision making authority, and they are elected to represent the people. And Alana had mentioned that we have the 5 districts within the reservation, and so we have 5. I'll say generally 5 voting members, that represent each of those districts. And so in theory, just like any elected official or representative, they should be trying to help carry the message of their constituents and advocating for what that group would like to see. In practice, I mean, like anything, it just depends on the situation that you're talking about. And we get way down, we get in the weeds just like any other bureaucratic group would. And so that's where us as departments and programs, they'll lean on us to come in and try to help answer the technical questions that go with something that's being evaluated. So it really is it's a team effort to try to get through a decision-making process generally. There's a lot of things that our council will make a decision on because it's how they feel about it, and that is what they were elected to do, whether I agree with that or not. But a lot of times they do reach out to us as department leads and programs to see what our take on that should be.
Thank you. This is a question for Commissioner Wood. Your county has passed an ordinance opposing Lava Ridge, and I think I understand from this question, opposing other renewable energy development as well, not just Lava Ridge. And you're not the only county that's done that. In fact, some counties are starting to pass ordinances opposing not only projects on public lands, but also projects on private lands as well. And I think Bannock County recently passed an ordinance which basically bans solar development on private lands in the county. I wonder if, as a county commissioner, you could opine a little bit about how it feels to be passing these ordinances that could have implications. Some landowners might really want and need these things happening around them or on their land for their own well-being, and their neighbors might not. And I wonder how you balance that. Some people wanted to develop large dairies and their neighbors said, please don't do that, and it happened anyway. Why is solar different than other developments, and how are you weighing in on this, and how should all of Idaho react, and what should we be learning from this? What are you trying to tell us?
Great question. So there was actually a 7-county ordinance passed opposing the project. And that's primarily because the citizens have come out in force saying that they don't want it. But I'm not saying that all the citizens don't want it. There is a minority of citizens who believe in the project, but overall, the majority does not want it. One of the unintentional consequences of the lack of education, mitigation, speaking to the landowners first, and many things that I could go on about, is that now you have counties passing ordinances that affect private land use, which I'm very opposed against. I think that, and I'm speaking only for myself, not for my county commission right now, because my other ones are not as big on this, but I am very much for private property rights. And I think that if you have a piece of property and you want to put a solar project on it, more power to you. If I had a big piece of property and it wasn't something that was making me a lot of money doing something else, I would want to put a solar project on it. And I wouldn't want anybody telling me that I couldn't, because I'm very much for private property rights. So one of the unintentional consequences of this uproar, and I'm even going to use the words pitchforks and torches, which it's come down to because people are scared, people are fearful and panicked, is that now you have counties that are passing ordinances trying to avoid private property from utilizing the ground, saying alongside of a project, saying, well, you can't have one that tall. You could have a hobby one for 150 feet. Well, that's not going to match the project that may or may not go in. Or you have a lot of rules against solar, or you have all these other rules that make it harder and harder to do it. I think that that's an unintentional consequence of the panic that's going on. And I think that we have to be very careful about taking away people's private property rights. We have several ranchers that have written to me and to the county commissioners saying that if the project goes in, and some of them love the project, some of them don't love the project, but are realistic enough to know that if it goes in, they would like to be able to put a windmill on the back 40 that they don't use that is directly adjacent to the project. It will help them, their family ranch, make money. And in years where we don't have much water, it's going to be a payment that they can get in. They've written letters to us saying, don't ruin my private property rights. So that's a discussion that we're currently having. Some other counties have already passed those kind of ordinances. We have not, but it is certainly a discussion right now. And I think it's a consequence of people being in such a panic, and we need to be very careful and look at private property rights because these things, in my opinion, belong more on private property than on public.
Thank you. I've got a card here that asks me to do a public audience participation question. So with regard to development of projects on public lands, these are lands owned in common by all citizens of this country. Of course, people who live nearest to them are often affected by them in ways that people who live far away from are not. But the question is, should these sorts of ordinances, which seek to stop the development of a large wind project or a solar project, should a local community have the right to veto a project that could be seen in the larger public interest? And that was a question where they wanted everyone to sort of raise their hands. Yes, local community ordinances should be weighed in as vetoes versus no, they should not. So who thinks that local ordinances should be seen by decision makers as vetoes on projects?
Yeah, I think it should be considered.
Say more about that.
Well, I just feel like it definitely is something that needs to be considered. I mean, whether it could put a full stop to a development or not is another question. But I don't think that it's at all right to that has sort of been the problem, I think, for us, is that things get planned, they get decided, and then we get the letter in the mail that says, move your stuff because Tuesday we're going to start this project. And so I think that being ahead of that, I guess I don't know if the community at large, I would say, we should have the power to actually, completely stop a project. But I definitely think that if collectively a community is opposed to it, I think that is when we need to be talking about potential alternatives. On the other side of that is that at some point, I think, as unfortunate as it might be for certain communities, we are going to have to do developments. And so we do have to figure that out. And that's the reality of where we're at today.
I'm going to assume that the audience largely agrees with that. We had one person who raised their hand saying that it should be a veto. I wonder, Commissioner Wood, if you view your ordinance as demands and vetoes, or you're showing people that there is a flashing yellow light here and you really need to have a different process to be part of it, and there is an outcome at the end that might work, or is this a hell no moment?
So I have to say that you need to take into consideration, especially when you have a 7-county area that citizens are turning out and majorities say, we don't want this. I also think that you need to take into consideration that change is hard and people are scared and they need more education, and we need to find out what the actual science is, what the actual profit is. There's a lot of questions out there that are unanswered in all of these projects. But as for an ordinance for a county, there is a belief out there for the citizens that we can stop projects on public ground, and I tell them over and over that this is federal ground. We cannot stop it. We can put in our comments. The feds are going to decide whether this happens, and what we get yelled at all the time is, you have more power, you can do something, you can have more power. Well, I will note that we've put in all of our comments every time there was a deadline for BLM. I sat on a subcommittee under the rack with BLM for a year, and sometimes it was painful. We have sent our letters. We've made our county ordinances opposing. We've done what we feel we can. Beyond that, it is out of our hands, but people still believe that it is. And I am very fearful of making P&Z ordinances in general that affect private landowners' rights. Like I said, I don't think that anything that we can do is going to veto it. I don't think that we have that power. It is a federal project and they're going to decide. But I do think that we need to be reasonable enough and wise enough to say a few things. One is, I'll say it again, fight to the death, but also invite these people in to say, what are you going to do if this happens? And make them sign papers now. Make them put it on the paper that says what's going to happen, what money they're going to give, whatever. So fight to the death, but make sure that you have a contract. And the other thing is be realistic enough to say, what if it does come in? I talked to another commissioner, and I won't mention what county, and I said, I'm fearful of your ordinance because they just passed an ordinance and it really limited the size and the scope of windmills if the project did come in on private land or private ground adjacent to, right alongside, that's out in the middle of nowhere. And they said, we don't want to put anything into our ordinance that might encourage these projects. And so we're not going to put those kind of things in. That bothers me somewhat, because being realistic enough to know that, go ahead, fight to the death. I'm all for it. Let's fight against it. But if it does come in against all odds and the federal government says you're having it, do I want to punish my rancher constituents out there in the middle of nowhere and not let them have, whatever it is on their project if they'd be adjacent to these federal projects? I don't want to punish them. I want to make sure that we can get benefit out of it. I want to make sure that if it's forced upon the county, and that's how it's going to feel if it happens, if it's for any of these projects, not just the current one, but any of them, if it's forced upon the county, I want to make sure that the benefit goes to the citizens. I want to make sure it lowers their property rights, or property taxes. I want to make sure that there's projects that are for the good of the citizen, and I want to make sure that my local ranchers who have 10 acres and their 50 acres in the back full of rocks can put something on it that would benefit them and help bring money into their families and the community. That's not what's happening right now, and that scares me. But I want to make sure that we look at that and say, if we lose the battle, we still need to make sure that we get the best benefits for our people in the county.
Thank you. We've got just a couple more minutes, so sort of some closing thoughts perhaps. And I'd ask that each of you, imagine yourself 20 years from now in the future. Tell me what you see affecting your communities and this renewable energy transition. Tell me how it's gone. Tell me about the good decisions that were made that got us there. And we'll start at this end.
Well, 20 years from now, it's kind of like in our office, we like to talk about how we're trying to plant trees that will never sit under the shade and enjoy it, And so when I think about 20 years from now, I'm definitely not going to be working in here. But what I'm hoping is that I have created partnerships that helped my community significantly be part of the energy transition to help make our community have that resilient security. I want us to have that part in there. So 20 years from now, I'm hoping that we have that in place, that we have low carbon or renewable technologies that my great grandkids can be like, oh yeah, that our power comes from just like literally 2 blocks away. It's right there, and it's great. And so 20 years from now, I that's what I envision, and that's what I hope to envision. And hopefully we have the right partners to work with. Hopefully we have the right development in place, and hopefully it's a win-win on all parts. I get it. Some people are in it for the money, and some people are in it for the environment, and we have some people that are in it for the future. I just hope all parties are in place in 20 years from now.
That's a really tough question. I guess in a dreamer's world, I would say 20 years from now, I hope that every house, every barn, every business has solar panels on it and taking advantage of that themselves, because I believe it is a great resource and we should all do it privately. I hope that we have increased our ability to recycle things like windmill blades and solar panels, and so that we know how to use those items to our benefit, so it's not such a huge discussion on where we go with outdated panels and blades, everything. I hope that we have that figured out and we are making great use of those in the future. I hope that we have developed nuclear to the point that we can have small nuclear plants, making sure that we're all safe and sound, because I do think that that's a great wave of the future. And I hope that the decisions that are made today, this year, on projects that we can use to everyone's benefit, regardless of whether we want them or not, and work together with the people to make sure that they are friendly to our community, that they're recyclable, that they're not just going to be standing there at the end of 20 years looking at us and not have been a resource. And so I hope that whatever decisions are made, that we all come together in our partnership, because that's the only way to work through these things.
I think that for me, one of the big things I'd like to see are people collectively consuming less energy. So, that's a big part of this. And I think that does start today with that education component, continuing to talk to people. And so I would really like to see that as one of the big indicators that we made the right moves today, is that over time we see those consumption rates come down. and then obviously having, smarter devices in our homes and things like that would be another great thing. And for the tribes in particular, we would like to at that point see some of our own generation happening, some of our own build outs, whether that's some small system that would power a community during a storm or something, things like that. We would like to see things like that happen for the tribes, and we're going to keep moving towards that. So,
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, and if we could have a round of applause. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and thanks for working on this important issue.